Good morning and welcome to Byju's. This is Basavaraj, and we will be continue from where we have left, right? So we'll wait for a minute and then we'll start. I hope I'm audible as well as clear to you all. Right. I'm audible as well as clear to you all, right? Visible to you all, right? Done. So yesterday we initiated a discussion on biodiversity hotspots, and then we made an analysis of a Himalayan biodiversity hotspot, the major issues associated with the Himalayas, and then we made an effort in understanding something about Western Ghats. Now, the moment when you talk about Western Ghats, remember that Western Ghats, as I told, it is spread in 6 states. Right. So Western Ghat, it is spread in 6 states. Then apart from that, Western Ghats make or provide many services. It provides many services. We discussed that part. It is a source of a many river. It is a region where we find a large amount of endemic native plants and animal species are there. It is a region where it is having cultural aspects, religious aspects, where we find many sacred animals are there, sacred plants are there, and we also find certain types of concerns there, like national parks are there, wildlife sanctuaries are there, and many species which are to be protected in that particular area, that protected areas. So in spite of having many services and benefits, this Western Ghat, which is very rich in endemism, and it is also having a threat. It also has a threat, and threats are deforestation, illegal mining, encroachment, right? Construction activities like highway constructions, hydroelectricity constructions, then farming activities, shifting cultivation, right? Conversion of land in that area. So it is having a major threat also, and it has already lost 70% of its habitat. 70% of its natural habitat is lost, right? So hence it is biodiversity hotspot of India, and not only the biodiversity hotspot, it is the hottest hotspot. And hence, to protect and conserve this, government made an effort to make committees. Now, two committees are important here. The first committee is referred as the Gadgil Committee. Gadgil Committee, right? Now, what this Gadgil Committee says? This Gadgil Committee says that we have to classify the entire Western Ghats into ecological sensitive area. Entire Western Ghat as an ecological sensitive area, and divided or classified or divided the Western Ghats into three zones. Right. So we refer them as ecological sensitive zone 1, ecological sensitive zone 2, and ecological sensitive zone 3. Ecological sensitive zone 1, ecological sensitive zone 2, and ecological sensitive zone 3. It has classified the entire Western Ghats into three zones: zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. Now, apart from it says that This ecological sensitive zone 1 needs high priority of protection. High priority of protection. And hence it suggested that construction activities, mining activities, and all other activities should be stopped there. Right. So construction activities, mining activities should be stopped in that areas. Should be stopped in that areas. Don't give any new licenses, because these are vulnerable for landslides, vulnerable for huge losses there. Then he also says that if any activities are to be allowed in sensitive zone 2 and 3, you should make a proper assessment of that. Proper assessment has to be done. Assessment has to be done. And assessment in the sense, if you want to make any big project there, then it has to be undergo thorough environment impact assessment. If we want to go or consider any project, then it has to undergo a thorough environment impact assessment. Environment impact assessment, right? So grazing and all, everything has to be reduced. So environment impact assessment. So I'll take up environment impact assessment maybe next week. So it is to study the impact of the proposed project. It is to study the environmental impact of the proposed project in that area. And if that project is having a huge environmental impact, then that project should not be allowed to continue. If any project which is proposed in that area, if it is having a significant amount of environmental impact to that region, and in that case, it should not be allowed to make the construction there. So hence a thorough environment impact assessment is very much significant there. So it classified the entire Western Ghats into the zones called as the ecological sensitive zones. Apart from that, it made that the powers should be decentralized. So it made there should be decentralization. Right. So decentralization means more powers should be given to local authorities. Decentralization, that is more power to the local authorities. To local authorities, that is Gram Sabha. More authority should be given to the Gram Sabha. Then apart from that, it also says that that is a region where people, well, they do agriculture, they grow only one crop. So when they grow only one crop, we refer that as monocropping. Right. Now here they say that if monocropping is done, then other crops and other vegetations are removed or destroyed. So monocropping will make removal of the vegetation or selective growing of the crops. So hence it suggested that if you want to do any type of activity, but you should prevent the monocropping. So no monocropping in the areas. No monocropping. No monocropping. Now, these are one of the or few of the important suggestions which were given by the Gadgil committee. So after these committee suggestions, peoples opposed that. The peoples opposed this. Why? Because people says that in the name of conservation, in the name of protection, economic activities will be hurdled. Because when we talk about sustainable development, so in the context of sustainable development, along with environmental protection, economic development is also important. I'm repeating, in the context of sustainable development, environmental protection as well as the economic development, both are significantly taken. In a very simple term, we say sustainable development is like a coin with two faces. One face is of economic development, the other face is of environmental concern. Environmental concern. So both should go hand by hand. Both should go hand by hand. So here people oppose that. Due to environmental concern, there may be possibility that the economic activities will be stopped, and this economic activity, when it is stopped, that will affect their livelihood. It will affect their livelihood. So hence many peoples opposed the Gadgil committee, and as there were many oppositions were there for Gadgil committee, to make an assessment of the recommendation of Gadgil committee, the government appointed one more committee called as Kasturi Rangan committee. Kasturi Rangan committee. Rangan committee. Right. Now, what this Kasturi Rangan committee says? Kasturi Rangan committee has classified something different from what the Gadgil committee has said. He has classified the Western Ghats into two categories. He has classified the Western Ghats into two categories. That is cultural landscape and natural landscape. Cultural landscape. Cultural landscape and natural landscape. Natural landscape. Right. Now, cultural landscape where human settlements are there. Cultural landscape where human settlements are there. Human settlements are there. And natural landscapes are the areas where the forests, where the vegetations, where the areas are seen, where no human settlements are seen. So cultural landscape and natural landscape. Then further he says that in the cultural landscape, in the cultural landscapes, he defined the area as ecological sensitive areas. So he has defined that in this cultural landscape, there should be an ecological sensitive area. Ecological sensitive area. Right. So this ecological sensitive area needs more protection. So he says that this area will need more protection and conservation. Now, when we take analysis of the Gadgil committee's protected area and the Kasturi Rangan's protected area, in the context of Gadgil committee, the protected area was 64% of the total Western Ghats. 64% of the Western Ghats was the protected area under Gadgil committee, which was opposed by the people. Now, as per Kasturi Rangan committee, so his area, which is proposed as the protected area, is 37%. 37% of Western Ghats is protected area under the Kasturi Rangan committee. Now, people of all the states, they say that even though the protected area has decreased from 64% to 37%, but still it is comparatively higher areas, comparatively more areas than what can provide them livelihood. Even though it has reduced, but that area, when you take the Western Ghats, complete area of Western Ghats, 37% is also very large, and that will hinder economic development in that areas. Like construction of projects, if you stop, then it will affect their economic activities. So hence, even this Gadgil committee is also opposed. It is also opposed. So many state governments have opposed that. In fact, all the state governments have opposed that. So Gargil committee is also opposed, and Kasturi Rangan committee is also opposed by all the state governments. Right. Now, last year, Karnataka government said that it may be or it will implement the Kasturi Rangan committee, but in delayed process. So there is no clarity. There is no clarity on the implementation of Gadgil committee and Kasturi Rangan committee. But in the episode of large amount of floods, land subsidence, which took place in Kerala, as well as the neighboring areas, Supreme Court, Supreme Court has suggested, and it has ordered. Supreme Court has suggested and ordered the center to implement the Gadgil committee in the Western Ghats, to implement Gadgil committee, not the Kasturi Rangan, Gadgil committee in the Western Ghats, and it was in the year 2020. Now, because of COVID and other issues, it was delayed. Because of COVID and other issue was delayed. So this is something about the committees. Now, still no state have been imposed or implemented the Gadgil committee or Kasturi Rangan committee. So they may come up with the implementation maybe in another 3 or 4 months, or maybe in this year they may come out with the implementation. Is it clear? So this is something about the Gadgil committee and the Kasturi Rangan committee. Right. So ban on mining, quarrying, and all those areas. Building, construction, and projects be allowed, but township has to be banned. So he has recommended certain restrictions in the Western Ghats. So remember these two committees. Right. Now, what is ecological sensitive area? In a very simple term, if we are having any protected area like national park, or sometimes when we say biosphere reserves, etc. So if this is a protected area or a national park, that is biosphere reserve, etc., from the boundaries of national park, from that boundaries up to 10 kilometers, up to 10 kilometers, up to 10 kilometers. So this area up to 10 kilometers is referred as ecological sensitive area. Ecological sensitive areas, right? And this is notified by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. It is notified by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change up to 10 kilometers. Now these areas acts like a shock absorber. They act like a shock absorber, or they provide protection to the national parks from the surrounding areas. So it is a transition. So it provides the protected area, transition from where the settlements are there, and this is protected areas. So in between settlements and the protected areas, the transition zone of 10 kilometers, we refer that as ecological sensitive areas. So they are very important to protect the animal species and plant species in that areas, and they are classified on topography, climatic, land use patterns, and many parts. Now, if any national park, if any reserves, if any state declares any ecological sensitive areas, then that national park, that protected area will be considered as important to be taken consideration for your prelim studies. So any states which have announced the ecological sensitive areas in the 1 or 2 years time. Not all the states. You may get 2 or 3 states. You may get 2 or 3 states, and which have made the analysis, and they have suggested to put the ecological sensitive areas. So those can be important in the context of that areas. Is it clear? So remember this. See, exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide is exchange of energy. Now, when I discussed about the biotic and abiotic component, I told you something about that the energy can be produced by 2 ways. One is in the presence of sunlight, called as photoautotrophs. In the absence of sunlight, we refer that as chemoautotrophs. So two types of the energies which are produced. So in the absence of sunlight, it is a chemical reaction. It is a chemical reaction which do not include photosynthesis. Done. Now, hope spots. Now, the moment when we talk about the hope spots, so this hope spots is an initiation of IUCN and Mission Blue. So, apart from the terrestrial area, we may find certain marine areas, underwater bodies. So, we may find certain marine or ocean bodies which need a protection because of significant endemic speciesums are there, and hence hope spots are introduced. Don't confuse this with hotspot. Hotspots are different, hope spots are different. Now, in the context of India, we have 4 biodiversity hotspots and 2 hope spots are there. 2 hope spots are there, and these 2 hope spots are, one is in this area called as Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and second one is Lakshadweep Islands. Lakshadweep Island, right? So this is where you should write. Mild disturbances means they will regulate that. They will regulate if it is necessity. Say for example, ecotourism is allowed with restriction. You can't ban ecotourism. So in that area, ecological sensitive area, limitations will be there. And certain activities which will not disturb them can be allowed. Mild activities can be allowed. You can't restrict the entire. Ecotourism is allowed in that areas, but commercial exploitation is completely banned in that areas, right? So hope spots, 2 hope spots are there in India. This is about the facts. So whenever when you are reading the current affairs and all, you should keep them in the mind. Done. Now we talk about something called as bio invasion, or we refer that as alien species. Now, what is bio invasion? Bio invasion, in a very simple way, we say any plant or any animal or pathogen means disease causing bacteria, disease causing insects, any pathogen, any plant, any animal or any pathogen, if it is transported, if it is moved, if it is introduced out of its native range, any plant, any animal, any pathogen, if it is introduced out of the native range. So this is the native range of the plants and animal species here. If it is introduced out of its native range, and this introduction can be accidental or deliberate. Deliberate means purposeful. Deliberate means purposeful or accidental. Accidental in the sense, so we find many ships move from island to the coastal areas or coastal to the island areas. So when the ships move from one coastal area to the island, so some plants and animals get attached to that ship without their knowledge, and when they move back to the island, to the coastal, sorry, from the island to the coastal, so these animals which were from the islands, they will reach to the coastal area. So this is accidental part. So any plant and animals or pathogens which have introduced out of its native range, either deliberately or accidentally, which can, so when they are introduced, what they do, they make ecological harm or economical losses to that. So they can bring economical loss or environmental loss where they are introduced, in the areas where they are introduced. Apart from that, they pose threat to the native species. They pose threat or harm to the native species. It can be plant or animals, or sometimes they can completely eliminate the native species. They can eliminate means remove, eliminate the native species. So such species or such types of invasions, we refer that as bioinvasion. Is it clear? Now, why they does this? The first one is they have the characteristics of rapid reproduction and growth. They reproduce very fast and they grow also very fast. And apart from that, they disperse very fast. So if this is an area where they have introduced, they spread very fast. Disperse means they spread very fast. Why? Because they do not have any enemy. No competition is for them. So no competition. So hence they spread very fast. And apart from that, they also have the characteristics of phenotypic plasticity. So what does this phenotypic plasticity means? So these plants and animal species, they adjust to the changing environment. They easily adjust to the changing environment. That is, when any species has introduced from A to B, so A is their native range and B is not their native range. So they will adjust whatever environmental conditions were there. If any changes are there in the B, they will adjust according to that. So that makes them more adaptability. To have more adaptability. They adapt very fast. Right. And they can survive on various food types in the wide range. So it means their niche can be easily adjusted. Any food which is there, they will eat and survive in that areas. And such types of events, we refer them as bio-invasion or alien species, which can pose a extreme severe threat, economic losses, threat or harm the native species. Now, if you see the reports, bio-invasion is considered as one of the major threat. One of the major threat major threat present to loss of biodiversity. Loss of biodiversity. It is considered as one of the major threat to the loss of biodiversity. Right. So remember this. So please understand, translocation is different, bioinvasion is different. Understand their characteristics. Understand their characteristics. So when we say translocation of cheetah, it has to be gauged with its benefits, not on the losses there. So translocation is different, and that now sometimes they can become, sometimes, I'm not telling that all the translocation or sometimes all the introductions are beneficial. Sometimes they can be dangerous one. Sometimes they can be dangerous one. So introduction of cheetahs, when we say, it is to protect the grassland and other benefits. So when I take translocation, we'll discuss that. So the motto is to protect that areas, but in turn their negative impact starts. In turn their negative impact starts. Now the classical example of the bioinvasion is when we take a look of the zebra mussel. So zebra mussel is native. It is native of Ukraine and Russia. And it has reached to many parts of the world, either accidental or with some parts. So it has reached to the other parts by accidental, to other parts of the world. Other parts. Now water hyacinth also we find it is seen in many parts of the world, and which has been reaching to the ponds and lakes, which is covering all those areas. So it is also referred as invasion species of plants. Right. Then we talk about cane toad. So cane toad is the largest toad in the world. Cane toad is largest toad in the world, and this cane toad is native of America, Central America. It is native of Central America, and it is posing threat to all the areas where it has been reached, where it has been introduced, more specifically to Australia and other parts where it has reached accidental, and it has posing threat to the native species of Australia. So this is what we refer them as accidental. Now we also have some types of deliberate introduction. Deliberate means purposeful, with purpose. Now among those deliberate purpose, the one is that the mongoose. Introduction of mongoose in Hawaiian Islands. Introduction of mongoose in the Hawaiian Island. Right. Now this Hawaiian Island, where the imperial powers, when it was a colony, they used to grow sugar canes there. And there was a threat to the sugar cane from rats. So here, large amount of sugarcane crops were there, and there was a threat of the rats to the sugarcane crops. Now to control the population of the rats, mongoose were introduced. To control the population of the rats. And as the mongoose did not have any type of the enemy there, it spread in that region, and then it occupied that area. Yes, eucalyptus you can give. Eucalypt also you can give. Right. Then second one is eucalyptus to control the malaria. Yes, you can give that also. Apart from that, in the context of India, when we say bunny grassland. So bunny grassland is in Gujarat. Now to protect the bunny grassland from saline water. See, When we talk about Gujarat, remember this region. Coastal intrusion will be there. To protect the Bunny grassland from saline water, the government introduced bubble trees. Called as Prosopis juliflora. Prosopis juliflora. Right. So Prosopis juliflora. So Prosopis juliflora is an invasive plant species in Bunny grassland of Gujarat, largest grassland of Asia. Apart from that, a report which was given in the end of 2023, it says that in the context of India, we have many natural ecosystems are there. Right? So 66% of the natural ecosystems in India pose threat from the invasion species. 66% of natural ecosystems in India. They pose threat from invasive plant species. So many areas like Western Ghats, the northern plains, Himalayas, where invasive plant species have entered there and they have become a threat in the context of India. And if you see few species which are seen in India, which have been threat to India are, one is this Prosopis juliflora. This is one of the prominent one. Along with that, we have something called as lantern camera. Which is also a more dangerous alien species. Along with that, you can add Cinna suppletus or eucalyptus. So many such species are there, which are referred as the invasive species in the context of India. So these are examples of invasive plant species in India. Now, sometimes when they are in the current affairs, maybe Western Ghats restoration, Bunny grassland restoration. So that can be in the news. I have explained something about this. So Bunny grassland, he's having a threat from Prosopis juliflora. Western Ghats and all, they all have the threat from Lantana camara, eucalyptus, acacia, all these type of the plants are there. Eucalyptus, which were introduced. Is it clear? So yes, you will find that in UP and many areas we find which were deliberately introduced during the British period. Now, as they do not have any natural enemy, they spread very fast, and that's why we say that this bio invasion is one of the major threat for biodiversity, because it is killing the native species. Is it clear? Okay. So next, we move on to cause of biodiversity loss. You should remember that the services which are provided by ecosystem are the same what you get from biodiversity. So the moment if they ask what are the benefits of biodiversity, you should remember the services of ecosystem. Which I have explained in the first class. Services of ecosystem means, again, it consists of two categories. One is resources and process. Right. So it provides food, it provides medicinal part, it provides fish, it provides fresh water, it provides fresh air for breathing, It provides all types of biological resources which are needed for human activities. And it also performed many types of the processes like bioturbation, photosynthesis, water purification, bioremediation, phytoremediation. So this is what we discussed in the initial class. So all these types. So if you see the ecosystems and their services in the concept of ecology, I have explained all those: the agricultural crops, the foods, the pastures, the animals like the animals, marine aquatic animals, or something like protein requirement which is sufficed by all this biodiversities, fish, or you can say all type of flesh what human consumption is done. So they provide all type of benefits. Apart from that, they have religious and cultural values also. Religious and cultural values also, like sacred groves, cows which are worshipped, people trees which are worshipped, neem tree which is used in the medicinal values. So all such benefits are there from biodiversity. So they provide immense services. They provide immense services to humanity. But in spite of providing immense services to humanity, they pose a threat. And that's where we say they are having the major threat of their survival, in spite of providing benefits. The first cause, generally many are there, but we'll discuss a few. The first one is natural cause. Whenever floods are there, earthquakes are there, there we find their natural habitats are destroyed. For example, floods in Assam, which affects the national parks and which made a huge impact on rhinoceros in that areas. One horned rhinos, right? So whenever earthquakes are there, the animal species and the plant species, they get disturbed in that areas. Or sometimes volcanic activity, volcanic fire, forest fire, etc., which disturbs the biodiversity, volcanic activity, etc., volcanic activity, etc. So all these are referred as natural causes of losses. Then apart from that, we also talk about habitat loss and fragmentation. So two terms are there: habitat loss and fragmentation. Now, habitat loss means if this is an their area where they stay, if that is habitat where they stay. Now, sometimes when we make illegal encroachment in that areas, sometimes when we make illegal encroachment, maybe for construction activities, or sometimes when we construct a road in that, sometimes when we make a construction of roads, a passage to connect the different areas, or sometimes maybe due to urbanization. So we acquire the part of natural habitats like national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. So in this case, we acquire their habitat. We acquire their habitat, right? So we refer this as loss of habitat. Loss of habitat. Along with that, when the loss of habitat is done, if you construct a road here, for the passage or somewhere, so we divide the place, we divide their habitat into two parts. This is one habitat and this is another habitat. And we refer them as fragmentation. So it creates fragmentation. Now, in both the cases, when it is acquiring and fragmentation, when we acquire their habitat, we refer that as habitat loss, or fragmentation when their areas are reduced. Now, what happens in that case? When you acquire their habitat, when their areas shrink into smaller, then they move out of their natural habitat. So these animal species, they move out of their natural habitat, and this will lead to man animal conflict. man-animal conflict. And we have many incidences of man-animal conflict. Leopard entering into habitation areas, cheetahs entering into habitation areas, elephants entering into agricultural crops, leopards or cheetahs entering into premises of the areas where schools and educational centers are there, which are constructed in those areas, In that case, domestic animals are killed, the cheetah can also be killed, or human population can also be killed. Or sometimes we find that when the areas are fragmented or disturbed, then these animals, when they are moving, sometimes they come under the tracks, like railway tracks are there. So in that railway tracks, accidents happens, a train moving there dashes to the bison, where the bisons have been killed. Accidental issues are there. So such types of losses which we see, we refer that as habitat loss and fragmentation, which is considered as the second major threat for what we refer them as the loss of biodiversities, right? Then hunting and poaching. So these animals, they are having high values in their market. Maybe their skin of a tiger, skin of a leopard, etc. And there are certain animals which are having medicinal values, right? Example, pangolin, Chinese pangolin, Indian pangolin, which is having medicinal values. So hunting and poaching of this system, maybe of rhinoceros for its horn, right? So rhinoceros, elephants for its tusks, skins, fur, etc., which are having high demands. And that is where we refer them as the hunting and poaching, which also poses threat to the biodiversities, right? Apart from that, extension of agriculture. See, tunnels is to make the passages connecting one habitat to another habitat. Tunnels are there to connect one habitat to another habitats, right? Then extension of agriculture. So many areas where extension of agricultures are there. Take the Terai areas of Himalayas, or the extension of agriculture in Indonesia, in Indonesia, Indonesia, where large amount of the jungles have been reduced into agriculture. In Indonesia, large amount of forests are converted into agricultural crops. Then you can take an example of Amazon forest. Right? So in the Amazon forest, we find many areas have been cleared for soybean cultivation. More specifically, they perform shifting cultivation in that areas. Shifting cultivation in that areas. Elephant ivory, tusks means ivory, perfect, right? So hence they will also create that overexploitation. If you are read with the carrying capacity, our ecological footprints have increased, the demands have increased, so hence overexploitation. If you see, the global ecological footprints have increased. Ecological footprints have increased, right? Why? Because population has increased, because increase in the population, increase in the demands, etc. So overexploitation of resources has been done. Which is a threat to biodiversity. Then alien species invasion. That's now we have seen. Many natural ecosystems are under the threat. Global warming and climate change. So the impact of global warming and climate change is acidification of ocean. I'm giving this an example where it affects corals. Yesterday we discussed that, right? So it affects the corals, mollusks, etc. Apart from that, the cyclones, floods, they make the submergence of coastal areas. The cyclones, the floods, which have increased will have an impact. Apart from that, due to the global warming and climate change, the wind patterns and precipitation patterns have been changed, which are creating droughts, forest fires, floods, etc., which are responsible for droughts, floods in some areas, forest fires, heat waves, heat waves and cold waves. So all these are associated with that. Yes, sound pollution, light pollution, you can add that. You can add that part. When you say pollution, sound pollution, light pollution, sound pollution, light pollution, air pollution, water pollution, right? So all these have been threat for the survival of biodiversities, right? So global warming, climate change, alien species, so these are the threat to the biodiversity. So when you are making notes, elaborately explain these points, right? Perfect. Done. I have explained alien species. I have explained in the previous slide. Alien means any plant or animal species which is introduced out of its natural region and which can harm to the native species where it has introduced. Please see that previous slide there, right? Then mass extinction, very significant, mass extinction. And there is no unanimity in the definitions, but the most accepted definition is when we find that loss of more than three-fourths of all the species, more than three-fourths of all the species in entire earth in a very small span, that is less than 2.8 million years. So when we lose more species than what it can be formed, when we lose more species than what it can be formed, we refer that as mass extinction. Now 2.8 million, here it may be very large, but compared to age of an earth, age of an earth, 2.8 million is very small. Age of earth is 4.5 billion years, right? So out of these 4.5 billion years, 2.8 million years is very small. So in a very small period, when the huge loss, three-fourths of the the plant and animal species, when they lost. So generally we say 75% of loss of the species, global species, when we lose, we refer them as the mass extinction. And earth has experienced 5 mass extinctions. 5 mass extinctions have been experienced by the earth, right? So 5 mass extinctions were there. And at present, if you see the 2024, many geographers, many environmentalists, they are having some clarity and some illusions are there, but they all say that either we are in the mid of 6th mass extinction, either we are in the mid of 6th mass extinction, or the 6th mass extinction has started, or the 6th mass extinction has started. Now there is an ambiguity with this point, that either we are in the mid of the 6th mass extinction or we have just started the 6th mass extinction. So this is about ambiguity. But in both the group of people, it is very much clear, in both the categories of the people, it is very much clear that the the present sixth mass extinction is man-made. It is man-made, accelerated by the man part, and hence it is referred as Anthropocene extinction or Holocene extinction. So the name given to the sixth mass extinction, which is man-made, either it is in the mid or recently we have started that. There is an ambiguity about the dates, but 100% they are very sure that it is man-made. Now, why man-made? Because of the activities which are done by the human beings, like hunting, overexploitation, emission of greenhouse gases, which is causing global warming and climate change, right? Deforestation, pollution, etc. So all those activities, mining activities, construction activities. So all these are referred as the Anthropocene extinction, right? So they may ask, what is sixth mass extinction, and elaborate that. So sixth mass extinction, there is an ambiguity about whether we are in the mid of that or whether we have started that, but it is 100% sure that it is man-made. It is 100% that the sixth mass extinction is induced by human beings, human activities, like destruction of the habitat, which cause man-animal conflict. So all those, if you calculate, hunting, overhunting, poaching for pride, for food and all, so that is where we find large amount of the biodiversities have been lost. Is it clear? Right. So this is something called as the mass extinction. See, these mass extinctions and all, when we talk about references, so these all are from many books, many reports, and many. So they are from Down to Earth magazine, they are from the global reports, they are from NASA, NOAA, IUCN. So from there I have merged that. If you read these, that is more than sufficient. Now the 5 mass extinctions were, the first mass extinction was somewhere around 445 million years ago. 445. You don't have to by heart that, but just remember that. It was mainly due to rapid cooling and falling of the sea level. The second mass extinction, which took place in the 340 million years ago. 340 million years ago. Right. Now, this is mainly where we find around 70%, or in many books it has mentioned 75% of losses were there. 75% of species were lost. In the first, it is 85%. And this is due to asteroid impact or global warming due to tectonic changes. Then the third one was 250 million years ago, called as the Permian mass extinction. Now, this Permian mass extinction is a very disastrous one. It is referred by a name called as Great Dying. Why? Because in this type of extinction, the Earth lost more than 96% of marine species. Were wiped out. 96% of marine species were wiped out, and 70% of terrestrial species were wiped out. So totally we say it led to removing wiping of more than 90% of the global species. So which led to the wiping of more than 90% plus of total species. And the major reason which they are given is super volcanic activity. The major reason given here is super volcanic activity. So large amount of gases which were released by the volcanic activity, like carbon dioxide and all. So these carbon dioxide and all, when they entered into the oceans, it makes the ocean water poisonous. Large amount of the volcanic gases which were released, huge volcanic activities which release the gases like carbon dioxide, sulfur and all. So these, when they entered into ocean, they made the ocean water poisonous, acidic, where the marine organisms could not survive that. Right. So that is where 96% of marine species were done. Then 200 million years ago, Triassic one, where we lost 76% of the species. Again, it is due to increase in the methane and desertification of land by natural process. It's not human being, natural process and frequent heat waves, because at that time we don't have the human beings there. Then no human beings were there, but desertification was there due to natural process. And the last one, the last recorded, which we refer that as fifth mass extinction, which wiped out the dinosaurs, on the earth. It is somewhere around 60 to 65 million years ago, and we refer that as K and T. K and T means we talk about Cretaceous, Paleogene, Cretaceous, Paleogene. Now, K is something German word, and the English terminology of that is Cretaceous. So remember this, that is more than sufficient. Cretaceous, Paleogene. Now, some 65 million years ago, large asteroids collided to the Earth. Asteroids, they collided to the Earth. Very big asteroids. They collided to the Earth. And these collision, we refer them as high velocity impact. High velocity impact. When they collided to the Earth, mean the water bodies and all, so they created big waves, waves of 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers height. 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers height. So they created waves of great heights, and the gases which were released during that activity is something which made the environment inhospitable for their survival. Now we have many examples of this. The best example of asteroid impact is which made the loss of biodiversity is in the Gulf of Mexico. And a crater which is created by an impact lake there, by an asteroid. We refer that as Chicxulub crater. It is named after this asteroid, Gulf of Mexico. And that region is also referred as Yucatan province. So in the Gulf of Mexico, you will find this Chicxulub crater, or Chicxulub, a big lake which is created by high impact. In spite of these 5 extinction, we are surviving. Why? Because of evolution has been taken place very fast. It is minimum 75% of the losses were seen. Apart from that, they also say that large volcanic activity is also one of the reason for that. large volcanic activity which took place in the Deccan Peninsula of India. Deccan Peninsula, that is when Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate, the reunion island. So in your geography, when we say African part, this is Africa. When Indian plate collided with the African plate, there we had a reunion hotspot. And this reunion hotspot made large amount of volcanic eruption. That's what Deccan Trap was formed, this reunion hotspot. It erupted large amount of volcanic activity which created the Deccan Trap, and this Deccan Trap is responsible for the black soils in Maharashtra, but the volcanic eruption released large amount of gases. Volcano released large amount of gases and which maintained them. Yes, you can say secondary succession. But in the larger scale. So this is what we talk about, the mass extinctions, 5 mass extinctions, and at present we are in the midst of the 6th, or in the beginning of the 6th mass extinction. Right. Now, at this stage, entire world knew that there is a loss of biodiversity. And they also knew the reasons for that. And they also thought that if we don't make the conservation of that, then again we may lead to faster extinction. Again, they thought that if we don't make an effort to protect, conserve, or prevent the illegal human activities, then we will reach to the mass extinction very fast. So hence an international organization was required which can take care of all these issues. So hence there was a need for international organization which can cooperate, collaborate, and give inputs, about the conservation, protection, activities of the global biodiversity, and thus to countries the data of global biodiversity to the countries, and also to NGOs, non-government organizations, which are making effort to protect non-government organizations which are making their effort to protect the biodiversity. So in this regard, in the year 1948, we created something called as IUCN, which is referred as International Union for Conservation of Nature, and this was created with the headquarter at Gland in Switzerland. And here its functions or duties of IUCN. Are that it is a governing body to protected sites, conservation and suitable use of natural resources. Governing body, right? Then it provides knowledge and tools for conservation and sustainable development, right? And it helps the countries to prepare a blueprint regarding the protection and conservation. Blueprint means the data which are given by that is very, very important, and the countries use them in their planning. So these blueprints are used by the countries through their national laws, through their laws, acts, etc. And by keeping them laws and acts, they make the protection areas. They create the protection areas or protected areas like national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, etc. So they create these types of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, etc. And they make acts like Wildlife Act and the the provisions of that. So they will make the acts and the provisions according to the inputs of the biodiversity status. If any plant or animal species, if their number has been shrunk, then it should be taken into criteria to protect its species. So such types of work is done by IUCN. Now, very important aspect of IUCN is it gives the data. It gives the data, and this data, which is given by International Union for Conservation of Nature, it provides the data, and this data it gives through a IUCN red list. The data which is given through a IUCN red list, and this red list providing data started providing data from 1964. And generally, it provides the information about global conservation, status of animals and plants. So we refer that as it is a indicator of the biodiversity here. So gents, we refer that as barometer of life. Barometer of life. So it gives the status. It gives the status of global biodiversity. Global biodiversity. Right. And it is a critical indicator health of world's biodiversity based on the inputs of this red list. Every country makes their plan. Every countries make their plan to protect biodiversity, protect their biodiversity. So hence it is referred as a powerful tool to conserve and policy change, like Biodiversity Act, which was implemented through the acts when they gave the data of these species. So here you should remember that it classifies all the species into 9 categories. So it classifies all the species into 9 categories. 9 categories. And you don't have to by heart all the 9 categories. The categories which you have to remember is: one is extinct. Extinct means that no more species are left. No more species are left. It is completely wiped out. Then second one is extinct in the wild. It means that these are taken out of their natural habitat and protected and conserved. So these plants and animal species, they are taken out of their natural habitat. They are taken out of their natural habitat and protected and conserved in separate setting habitat, and then they are protected or conserved in separate setting. We refer them as extinct in the wild. Extinct means it is already not existing. Extinct in the wild means that it is taken out of the natural habitat and it is protected in some other region. Then we come across the three categories. Three categories, remember them. Critically endangered, where the number of species are reduced to very, very low. If you don't protect, if you don't conserve, then these critically endangered species may become extinct in the wild. And then endangered species, whose number are bigger than that of critically endangered. Then vulnerable one, whose number are still more than that, still more than that. And all these three combinedly we refer them as threatened categories. We refer them as threatened categories, which need highest protection, which need highest protection and conservation. If you don't protect and conserve, then these species will enter into that. Then next is where the species is more abundant. We refer them as near threatened, least concern. So at least remember this category: extinct in the wild. Then threatened includes critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. Threatened includes three subdivisions: critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. Then we are having near threatened, least threatened, and data insufficient. So these are IUCN red list. Now this red list is released. So generally once in 2 years. Generally, I'm telling. The last time when it was released, last time when the data was released, it was during COP 28 in the year 2023. We refer that as IUCN red list of 2023. Red list of 2023. Now in this IUCN red list, you don't have to buy at all the species. There are thousands of species which are classified in the categories. But those species which have changed their categories, two possibilities are there. They have changed their categories. It means either they have improved their categories, which have moved from critically endangered to vulnerable, or some categories which have become very worst. Like they have moved from endangered to critically endangered by overexploitation. So those categories which have changed their characteristics, changed their categories, they can be important in the context of your examination. Now certain species, for example, if you take a species called as antelope, if you take a species of saiga antelope, now this saiga antelope, it has changed its category from critically endangered to near threatened. Why? Because systematic protection and conservation are there. So saiga antelope, which has changed its category, from critically endangered to near threatened. Then we have something called as plant species, big leaf mahogany. And this big leaf mahogany has changed its category from vulnerable to endangered species. So we come across many such species which have changed their categories. This should be remembered. Then if any new entries are there, New entries are there. That you should keep in the mind. So the data which is released from 2023, if you are reading your current affairs, so from 2023, if they are appearing in the news, then they are very, very significant, because the Saiga antelope is in the news. Saiga antelope, we have two subspecies. Saiga antelope, we have two species. One species which is referred as Tatarica, Saiga antelope. One species is called as Tatarica, which is found in all the ranges, but one species which is very endemic to Mongolia, one species which is referred or specific to Mongolia, so we refer that as Mongolica, which is found only in that areas. And because of the efforts which has been done by the conservation authorities, it has been shifted from critically endangered to near threatened. A very huge big jump has been done to that regarding this Saiga antelope. So such questions you can expect in the context of your preliminary examination. Is it clear? Okay. Now next is the criterias. Now they may not ask in detail, but remember, if it is critically endangered, if any species has classified as critically endangered in the IUCN list, so remember that there are three criterias which are given. One is reduction in the 90% of population in the last 10 years, or less than 50 mature individual population is there, or probability of extinction in the wild is at least 50% within 10 years. So any of the three criteria, if it is satisfied, then we refer that as critically endangered one. Then if you classify that as an endangered one, then 70 to 90% of population in the last 10 years have been reduced, less than 250 mature individuals there, and probability of extinction 20 to 30. So any of these three, if it is satisfied by any species, then we refer that as endangered species. Right? So when we talk about vultures in India, we are having 9 vultures. Out of 9 vultures, 3 vultures are classified as critically endangered, and I have given you the details of that when we talk about something called as bioaccumulation and biomagnification. In India, out of 9 vulture species, 3 vulture species are critically endangered one, right? Then vulnerable, the moment when we say, it talks about criteria of 50 to 70% of population in 10 years and 10% probability of extinction in 100 years. So this is 10 year, 20 year, 100 years of probability of extinction. So based on this, we can classify them as critically endangered, and vulnerable. Critically endangered and vulnerable. So please remember this chart. Critically endangered, and vulnerable, right? And remember, all these critically endangered, and vulnerable, they are referred as threatened species. They're referred as threatened species. I hope it is clear now, right? So don't by heart all those, only those which have changed their categories and which are in the news you can remember, because hundreds of species, it is not in the human capacity to by heart and remember them, right? Extinction in the wild, extinction, threatened species, and this, right? So this is about the definitions. You can read it one time or more. Don't make much research on that. This is more than sufficient. Is it clear? Then we have something called as the alien species which are having a threat. Alien species which are having a threat. And as I told that there is a major threat of alien species on biodiversity. So this has alien species are referred as one of the major threat to the biodiversities, and that is the reason why IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, in the year 2020, it has decided that we will make a separate criteria to identify the impact of the alien species. We will make a separate criteria to study the impact of alien species on biodiversity biodiversities. And hence they created an instrument, they created a criteria called as EICAT, that is Environmental Impact Classification of Alien Taxa. And this was created by IUCN in the year 2020. And the idea is to study the impact of alien species on the biodiversities. Right. Remember that in the context of IUCN Red List, we have 9 categories. And in that 9 categories, 3 categories are referred as threatened. So here in the impact of alien species, you will have 5 impact categories. 5 impact categories. And all these 5 impact categories are based on the magnitude of its effect, based on magnitude of alien effect, magnitude of the alien effect. Is it clear? Now here when we say EICAT, it makes the classification of impact of alien species on environment. Don't make much research on that. It classifies the alien taxa into 5 impact categories according to the magnitude of the impact, determinal impact on the environment. And it represents different magnitude of them, whether it is environmental, ecological, and all. Right. And it is applied at national, regional, and global level. All these levels. So remember, these are the factual data statements which you should remember. Right. Then these are the impact categories. These are impact categories. Right. So as I told you that environment impact classification of alien taxa is the impact of the alien species where they have introduced out of their natural range to some other areas. They can make environmental harm, ecological impact, they can make economical loss, they can harm the native species, and these are one of the major threat for loss of biodiversities. To understand their magnitude, where they are making impact, whether it is completely overtaking that natural habitat, or whether it is in the initial stage, whether it is in the intermediate stage, or whether it is almost all eliminating the species. So we refer them as impact categories. So the impact of alien species, we classify them into 5 impact categories. Right. So here it talks about minimal concern, means recently it has been introduced and it has started to pose a threat. Massive means it is completely. Massive means most destructive. Right. So here almost all the countries have ratified that, because it is very important for them. And now it is in the year 2020, so we don't have complete data about how many countries have been signed that. So almost every country wants to protect its biodiversity. So it is protecting the biodiversity. It is protection of biodiversity from the impact of alien species. Impact of alien species. Is it clear? So remember this 5 impact categories. Now you don't have to make an in-depth analysis of many topics. Wherever it is required, I'm giving you in data of that. Right. Now next we talk about their objectives. Read them, not required to by heart. Identify those taxas which have different level of environmental impact. Taxas, their environmental impact, how they can harm. Then facilitate comparison of the level of impact, whether it is in the first stage, second stage, or in the destructive state. Then it provides future impacts of that. What will happen in 2030 if you don't control them, right? And aid in prioritization of management of action. They help the countries, they help them to reduce them, to reduce the alien species. It is not done in one day, in the phased manner, in the phased manner. So they provide aid in evolution of management of those. So these are objectives of the EICAT. Objectives of EICAT. Alien taxa means the alien and their categories. In uh, say biology, we have something called as taxonomy, naming of the plants and animal species. Taxonomy means naming. I hope Carolus Linnaeus is a person. Carolus Linnaeus is a person who has given the criteria of naming the species, and we refer that as taxonomy. Alien taxa means category of the species. Right. Okay. Then biodiversity conservation. Now we know that there are threat to the biodiversities, plants and animals. So in this concern, every country will have their own methods of conservation. Now in the context of India also we are having, so every global conservations are there, and these biodiversity conservations, it is to protect, conserve and prevent the further over exploitation, prevent the further part. They are IUCN means it will be gland only. It is a part of IUCN. Remember, EICAT is a part of, it is introduced by IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. So its headquarter will be gland only. So here to protect, conserve and prevent. So we have two types of biodiversity conservation. Two types of biodiversity conservation. So the first one is what we refer them as, we protect and conserve. Protect, conserve the endangered species. Protect and conserve the endangered species. Endangered species in their natural habitat. Endangered species in their natural habitat. Natural habitat. We don't take them outside. We don't take them outside. And we refer this as in situ conservation. In situ conservation. In situ conservation. Now, when we protect and conserve the threatened species, that is, the threatened species, which are protected and conserved out of their natural habitat, out of natural habitat, natural habitat in separate setting, in separate setting, separate setting, we refer this as ex situ conservation. We refer that as ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation. Now, the example of in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. Can you give any example of in situ conservation? Anybody? Anybody? Ex situ conservation examples will be what we refer them as botanical gardens. We have zoo. We have seed banks, etc. Perfect. And in situ example, national park, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, etc. Perfect. Biosphere reserve, wildlife sanctuaries, all these are referred as in situ conservation. So we have two types of conservations are there: in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. Perfect. Perfect. Right. Two types of conservations are there: in situ as well as ex situ conservation. Right. Bird sanctuaries, all are there. Bird sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuaries, we refer them as the in situ, where we protect and conserve. We don't take the species out of that. They are within them. They are within them. Now, in the context of India, we have 107 national parks as per the data, and more than 550 wildlife sanctuaries, and then we are having conservation reserves and community reserves there. Now, when I take forests, I'll explain them now. At this stage, don't get much stressed. I'll explain what is reserved area, what is conserved area, with reference to each other. When I take forests, don't get much stressed about this. I'll explain them. Don't get much stressed. So national parks are there, then wildlife sanctuaries. Now, what is difference between wildlife sanctuaries? What is difference between wildlife sanctuaries and national parks? Right. Now, the national parks is a legal area, and wildlife sanctuary, they are also legal areas. It means that they are created by legislation. Both are created by legislation, by an act which are given. Now, second one is human activity. Human activity is allowed in wildlife sanctuaries, whereas human activity is not allowed in the national parks. So it means that national parks cannot be owned by private. National parks can't be owned by private, whereas wildlife sanctuaries can be owned. They can be owned privately. They can be owned privately. Now, do we have any private? Do we have any private wildlife sanctuary in India which is owned by private? Try to check this. Any private wildlife sanctuary? We don't have any national parks which are owned by private. They all are by the government. They all are by the government. Then next perspective is about their borders. The borders of the national parks are fixed. They are fixed, whereas the borders of the wildlife sanctuaries are not fixed. Not fixed. Right. Not fixed. And thence we say wildlife sanctuaries are comparatively bigger. They are comparatively bigger. Yes, one privately owned is the SAI, Save Animal Initiatives. SAI, Save Animal Initiatives, and this is in Kodagu of Karnataka. Which is the only privately, it is the only privately owned wildlife sanctuary, Kodagu in Karnataka. Right. Save Animal Initiatives. This is how you should remember that there are hundreds of wildlife sanctuaries, but it is the only privately owned wildlife sanctuary in India. Right. Then ownership, that's what I told. Private ownership is allowed. Here, no private ownership is allowed. In the wildlife sanctuary, individual species can be conserved. So this wildlife sanctuary provides conservation of individual species. It can provide conservation of individual. So you can protect individual species here. You can protect individual species there. But here, no individual species are protected. No royal treatment for any. All the species are taken for protection. All are protected. All are protected. So this is the difference between wildlife sanctuary and the national parks. National parks in the context of India. Right. Now, wherever when we talk about these national parks, you can't by heart all the national parks. But those national parks which are recently created, like the Raimona National Park, right? The Raimona National Park and Dihing Patkai, the recent created one. Dihing Patkai is referred as Amazon of East. Dihing Patkai is referred as Amazon of East. Very rich in biodiversity. Very rich in biodiversity. So by these Raimona, Manas, Orang, Nameri, and Kaziranga. So Assam has existing 5 plus 2. So totally 7 national parks are there in Assam, including the newly created Raimona and Dihing Patkai. And now Assam has the second highest national parks in the world. State. Assam is a state which is having second highest national parks in India. Second highest national park in India. Yes, all are national parks. All these are national parks. So these all are national parks of Assam. National parks of Assam. Right. Now, which state has the highest number of the national parks? Sometimes if they ask, the state with highest number of national park. Right. So sometimes they may ask, try to find out which state has highest. Now, which is the largest national park in the India? Largest national park in India. Yes, Madhya Pradesh. State highest is Madhya Pradesh. The largest national park in India is Hemis National Park. Hemis National Park, which is in Ladakh Union Territory. And this Hemis National Park is also the highest national park of India. It is also the highest national park in India. Hemis National Park. Right. So there may be questions like this, the largest one. Right. And then second largest is where the great Indian bustard is protected and conserved. Second largest is where we find the great Indian bustard is protected and conserved. Remember, great Indian bustard is critically endangered species. Critically endangered species. Right. Now, this second is the Desert National Park of Rajasthan. Desert National Park of Rajasthan. Right. So such national parks which are in the news. So these national parks which are in the news from last 2 years. So they can be important for your examination. They can be important for your examination. Is it clear? So those national parks which are in the news will be seen here. Is it clear? Now, Tiger Reserve. The moment when we talk about Tiger Reserve, how many Tiger Reserves are there in India? So there is the numbers. We have 54 Tiger Reserves in India, which are official. And there is a proposal for 55th Tiger Reserve. And this 55th Tiger Reserve will be in the state of Goa. Proposal in Goa. That is in the Mahdai Tiger Reserves. That's what, Stephen. There is a proposal for the 55th. 54 have been announced. There is a proposal for this 55th. So they will not ask you exactly numbers. So they will ask some. So you should say around 54 tiger reserves are there in India. Now the tiger reserve structure consists of core area, core area, and this core area is completely undisturbed area. It is undisturbed area, undisturbed area, and this has a status of legal status of national park or wildlife sanctuary. It is having a legal status of national park or sanctuaries. Undisturbed, nothing is allowed in this areas, nothing is allowed in this areas, in the core areas. Now sometimes if it is needed, then some ecotourism activities like safaris are allowed, but with some condition. But with some condition, safaris are allowed, but with some condition, with some condition. It is completely undisturbed area, we refer that as core area, and the area which is surrounding that is buffer area. The area surrounding that is buffer area. So remember, the tiger reserve has two structures, one is core area and buffer zone. Buffer zone, it is a mix of forest and non-forest land management. So here certain economic activities are allowed. Economic activities are allowed. It can be small amount of agriculture, small amount of the timbers, forest products, but it should not affect the core areas. They are allowed with some restrictions. Allowed with restrictions. Right. So tiger reserves, it can be in the national park, it can be in the national park, part of the national park or part of the wildlife sanctuaries combinedly can be converted. So if it is a national park is there, and if it is a wildlife sanctuary, then the combined area they can create as a national park, or a part of the national park can be created as. So it is taken out of that area and then it is declared as a tiger reserve by government. We'll take up that when I take Indian biodiversity. In buffer zone, man animal conflicts occurs. Yes, yes. If there is a problem with the legal, there is a problem with the disturbances, then man animal conflict is possible in this areas. Man animal conflict is possible in that areas. Right. Now, biosphere reserve. So before that, you can have a break and we will meet up at 8 a.m. We'll meet up at 8 a.m. Yes, Gurgasipur is also included. So that means that I have given you the data. So once it is completely accepted, once it is completely formed, then you can put them. So they are your current affairs part. They are your current affairs part. Perfect. Perfect, Stephen. So you have to make data from these parts. We can have a break and we'll continue from where we have left. Okay, welcome back. So hope I am audible as well as visible to you all, right? Done. So this is something about tiger reserve. And regarding the recent tiger reserves, I'll take up when I take the Indian biodiversity factual data. I'll take up facts in one part. Then we have something called as biosphere reserves. So the moment when you talk about biosphere reserves, understand that Earth's biodiversities were under the threat. So efforts were started from 1950s, 1960s, like setting up of IUCN in 1948, setting up of important institutions to collaborate and protect. Now, in the same regard, after 1947, 1964 IUCN Red List was to be reviewed, and it started giving the position or the state of biodiversities. So when we started getting the state of biodiversities, it provided the information by which we can gauge and understand that if we don't a proper conservation, then there will be a threat. So hence, in this all regard, in the year 1968, World Biosphere Conference was convened. World Biosphere Biosphere Conference was convened, was called. It was an intergovernmental convent. It is an intergovernmental conference, World Biosphere Conference, which is an intergovernmental conference to understand and make decisions for global biodiversity protection. To understand and make the decisions or plan in the context of the global biodiversity. And it was an initiation of UNESCO, right? And this world conference led to a program called as Man and Biosphere Program. So in this program, among all the decisions, when they did in the conclusion, among all the conclusion, one important conclusion was that to set up biosphere reserves under the Man and Biosphere Program. Biosphere reserves under Man and Biosphere Program. Remember. So biosphere reserves programs are the part of Man and Biosphere Program of UNESCO. UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Program, which was the result of World Biosphere Conference of 1968. And ultimately in 1970s, every country started to develop or create the biosphere reserves. Now, the major objective of biosphere reserves will be same. One is to protect and conserve the biodiversity. Now, how you can protect and conserve the biodiversity? Only when you make study. Only when you make the study. So hence, the study is very important here. Study and understand. Study and understand about that area, about the species. So studies were also seen. Then it should also provide international cooperation. International cooperation. Plus, the fringe communities, the people who are staying in the locality, they should also get some developments. Their benefits also. International cooperation and the fringe communities. Fringe communities. That is the local peoples. So their economic development was taken. So keeping these three things in the mind: international cooperation, protection and conservation, economic development of the communities which are there. So keeping these three things in the mind, the biosphere reserves were structured. Biosphere reserves were structured with the aim of conservation, with the aim of studies, and with the aim of having the international support and cooperation. And this biosphere reserve consists of the three structures. Remember, in the context of the tiger reserves, two structures are there. So here also it consists of core area, which is completely undisturbed area, and surrounding the core area, the area which is used for study, and surrounding that area, study, we have a third zone. So biosphere reserve consists of three zones. It consists of the three zones. One is the core zone, then where the research and study is done, and the third zone, where we refer that as a transition zone, where economic activities are allowed. So core zone, buffer zone, and transition zone, right? So it consists of three zones: core zone, buffer zone, and transition zone. Remember that: core zone, buffer zone, transition zone. Core zone consists of completely protected areas, undisturbed area. Core area is undisturbed area, which has the status of national park or wildlife sanctuaries. Undisturbed area. And surrounding this core area, we are having a buffer zone where research and studies are done. Study and research are done. Training, education, etc. And in this, sometimes it's not always settlements are allowed. Not always. Sometimes it is allowed. It is not that completely removed from that areas. Tribal peoples who are staying there. Then the third area is referred as transition area. That is the third zone, where we find economic activities are allowed for sustainable economic development of the communities there. Like agriculture is allowed, small timber collection is allowed, minor forest products collection is allowed here. So we refer that as the transition zone. So remember, biosphere reserve have three structures: core, buffer, and transition zone. Now, in the context of India, how many biosphere reserves are there? In the context of India, how many biosphere reserves are there? So this is UNESCO's Biosphere Conference. That's what I told you. UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Program, and then objectives of Man and Biosphere Program. And this Man and Biosphere Program lead to setting up of biosphere reserves. And there are more than 600 biosphere reserves are there in India, and in the world. And in India, we are having 18 biosphere reserves. So remember that. And what Ketan, what you say, it is also correct. But out of these 18, 12 biosphere reserves are those which are referred as World Network of Biosphere Reserves, World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Now, I'll discuss that when I take the Indian biodiversity. I'll explain that. So remember, there are total 18 biosphere reserves are there in India, and out of 18, 12 biodiversities are referred as the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. World Network of Biosphere Reserves. No, not on the basis of connectivity, on the basis of sustainable development. And sustainable development goals which have been implemented there. Right. So connectivity, cultural development, sustainable development. So all those are included. included. So out of 18, 12 are referred as the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Right. We refer them as World Network of Biosphere Reserves. Out of 18, 12 in India are referred as World Network of Biosphere Reserve, which are formed with sustainable development, which are there for sustainable development. So remember, World Network of Biosphere performs extra work along with protection and conservation. Along with protection and conservation of the species, they also make sustainable development of the community which are there. And this sustainable development community is done along the lines of sustainable development goals. On lines of sustainable development goals. Right. So it talks about environmental concern plus their sustainable developments. Right. So we have a concept called as World Network of Biosphere Reserves. So along with protection and conservation, they perform sustainable development of the area along with their cultural perspective and in the lines with the sustainable development goals. Remember, there are 17 sustainable development goals are there. Right. Now, next we move on to a convention called as CITES. Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Now, the CITES is also referred as Washington Convention. It is also referred as Washington Convention, and it entered into force in 1975, right? And India became a member of that in 1976. Now, we come across endangered species. So it is Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. Now, endangered species like pangolin, tigers, etc. So these endangered species, so there is always a threat. There is always a threat of smuggling of them, trafficking of them. Smuggling of them or trafficking of them. Right. So generally we refer that as an illegal trade. Illegal trade. Like we have many incidences where pangolin was rescued by officials. Olive ridley turtles. In Odisha, where in the airports they were rescued by a personals. So pangolins, olive ridley turtles, which are endangered species, which are very high demand in the international market, maybe because of their medicinal values or because of their skin, which is used in cosmetic industries, etc. So they are in very high demand. Plus, their numbers are very, very less, where we say illegal trade is done. And this illegal trade is something which is having a threat. Now, the threat associated with this is whenever illegal trade is done, it creates large amount of money. Huge money is received from that. And this money is involved. In anti-national activities. Like this money is used for terrorist funding. Or sometimes this money is used in what we refer them as the illegal transactions called as money laundering. It is seen in money laundering. So hence it was decided that if we don't restrict and control this illegal trade, then it will pose a threat not only to the species, and it will also create organized crime. It will also create the organized crime. Organized crime like terrorist funding and money laundering. Money laundering. And that is where it was decided that we will have a international convention, and this is an international agreement between the government to ensure that international trade in the species which are having a threat should be restricted. Should be restricted. And remember that the sites is legally binding. The sites is a convention which is legally binding. Legally binding. And the countries which have signed that, the countries which have signatories to that, we refer them as conference of parties. The countries which have signed that. And out of that, many countries have ratified that. But this is a legally binding international convention. The countries which are referred as signatories, we refer that as conference of parties. Conference of parties. We refer that as governing body. Governing body. COP of sites. It is legally binding. It is legally binding. But it is not implemented by itself. So it is not self-executing. It is not self-executing. Every country, to ensure implementation of sites, it has to make in its national framework. National framework. And that is the reason why India has made a systematic change. If you are reading your current affairs, we have made a change in the Wildlife Act of 1972. And in the 1972 Act, we have added a schedule. To implement sites in India. Sites implementation. And this was done in the year 2022 and 23. So more specifically, we say in the year 2022. Right. So we made an amendment to the Wildlife Act of 1972, and then we made a provision to add. The implementation of sites in the India's national law. And here it classifies all the species into three appendix. Three categories. Appendix means categories. The first one is Appendix 1, where it says that species which are both threatened with extinction or may be affected by the trade. So they should be restricted. Extinction or may be affected by the trade. Strong restrictions should be given to that. Then, like pangolin, you can say, is Appendix 1. Then Appendix 2, the species which have become threatened unless trade is restrictively regulated. They are not determinant, but you should make sure that bulk of them are not allowed. You can allow the trade only. If it is necessity. Right. Then Appendix 3, the species which are protected in at least one country. So these are the three appendices of the sites. Now, if any species is in the news, maybe the pangolin, or maybe olive ridley turtle, or any such of the plant species, then there should be taken as your current affairs. Now here I told that governing bodies, the countries which have signed that, the countries which have signed signatories to CITES, we refer them as the conference of parties. The countries which are signatories to that, we refer that as conference of parties. Generally we refer them as COP. So every convention will have their own COP. Every convention will have their own COPs. Conference of parties, we refer them as governing bodies. Governing body. Like in CITES, COP is of a different group of countries. In the context of climate change, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, they will have a separate group, Conference of Parties for UNFCCC, Conference of Parties for CBD, Conservation of Biodiversity, Conference of Parties for every convention, right? So for every conventions, international conventions, we will have a governing body which have signed that. We refer them as the Conference of Parties. And these governing bodies, they always make sure that we are meeting once in twice or 3 years based on that. So they will always have a periodic meeting. Periodic meeting is there. They meet either once in a year or sometimes twice in a year, or sometimes they meet once in 3 years. Once in 3 years. Like you can take an example of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It meets every year. Every year it is meeting. And we refer that as Conference of Parties of UNFCCC. Conference of Parties of UNFCCC, which meet. Now in the same way, the Conference of Parties to CITES, they meet once in 3 years. They meet once in 3 years. Once in 3 years. And the 19th meeting of the CITES. Number is based on their meetings. See, for example, if they are meeting for the 19th, we refer that as COP 19. And if you are known that for the 28th time UNFCCC met in the year 2023, so it is referred as COP 28. So the number defines their meeting part, right? So the number defines their which time or what is the frequency of their meeting, right? So 19 means it is 19th meeting. 19th meeting, and they meet once in every year. COP 28 means that 28th time the UNFCCC is meeting since its inception. Since its inception. Is it clear? Now, the COP 19, which was in the year 2022, was held in Costa Rica. This is place. Right, and the outcomes of that, here many outcomes are there, but with reference to India, two Indian turtle species were placed under Appendix 1 to be protected. Appendix 1 to be protected, right? And here to be protected, we come across the Batugar kochuga, that is red crowned roofed Batugar kochuga, and Lethes soft shell. And this is Batugar kochuga. Both were classified or moved towards the Appendix 1. Appendix 1 of CITES. So remember this. Then, among the plants, the Shisham dalbigra, which is placed under Appendix 2. Appendix 2. It means that volume of the Sisam Dalbegra can be exported. So it is a relief which is given to handicraft industries in India. It is a relief which is given to handicraft industries in India. Now they can export more handicrafts. Now they can export more. Initially, the volume was less, but the moment when it is transferred to Appendix 2, now it can export more furnitures, chairs, etc., which can benefit to the craftsmen of India. Benefit to the craftsmen of India. Is it clear? Right. So CITES 2022. So these are two important perspectives with reference to India. Sisu or Shishamam. So it is something which will boost to the India's handicraft, where we make many things like chairs are there, many many instruments which are used in worshipping of that. Right. So many decorative pieces will be there. Right. So it will be a relief to human being. Now, when we talk about this, remember that the most trafficked animal in the world, most trafficked animal, most trafficked means most traded animal. Can anybody tell me which is the most trafficked animal, which is most traded animal in the world, which is having a threat of its existence, and it is used in the medicinal values? Not snake, it is pangolin. It is pangolin. Pangolin, which is the most trafficked animal. Pangolin, which is most trafficked animal. And if you see in the context of India, we are having two pangolins. In Indian territory, we are having two pangolins. One is Chinese pangolin, and second one is Indian pangolin. Indian pangolin. Now, don't worry about this data. Don't get much stressed about this. Just remember that now the Chinese pangolin is classified as, initially it was critically endangered, even today it is critically endangered. Whereas Indian pangolin, it is endangered status. Endangered status. And remember that they are used for medicine, because of the skin and other parts. So it is the most trafficked animal in the world. Is it clear? Okay. Now next we move on to something called as CMS. CMS, it is also referred as Convention on Migratory Species. So it is also referred by a term called as Bond Convention. Bonn Convention, because it was signed in Bonn of Germany, and hence it is referred as Bonn Convention. Now, what is this Bonn Convention and why it is in the news? It is an United Nations Environment Programs initiatives. The major objectives of this is, we come across migratory species of birds and mammals. So we come across migratory species. Of birds and mammals. Migratory means which move from one area to another area. Migratory species of the birds which move from source, and when they reach to the area, we refer them as destination. Now, any migratory species which is traveling on the land on the land mammals, or through the water, or through the air. Flying. So these species, migratory species, either bird or mammal, which travel from source to the destination, they always have a threat. While traveling, they always have a threat. Maybe when they are flying, they will have a threat from electrical poles, accidents, or when they reach to the destination, polluted water. When they drink, they will have a threat for their survival. So hence protecting these migratory species from their source up to destination, to protect and conserve these migratory species from the source till their destination, on land, water, or air. We refer that as the Convention of Migratory Species, or Bond Convention. Now, generally, when you talk about the birds, so these birds, they make annual migration. Annual migration. Annual migration means they move from one area to another areas. Annual migration, right? So they move one area to another area for breeding, surviving, or reproduction, etc. Right? So they move from one region to another region. Maybe during winter season, Siberian crane entering to India, etc. So they always migrate. So they have their migratory paths. And generally, these migratory paths, we refer them as flyways, international bird flyways. And they have identified that there are nine international flyways. 9 international flyways are there. That is, migratory paths are there. And out of these nine, 3 are where India is also seen. 3 paths are there where India is also part of that. And among these three, a very famous one, which is always in the news, we refer that as the Central Asian Flyway. Among these, Central Asian Flyway. Very significant path where the Siberian cranes reaches to Chilka Lake. We find many birds reaches to wetlands for their breeding. And this Central Asian Flyway, it covers 30 countries. 30 countries. So the birds from 30 countries reach India or any other parts of these. India is a part of the Central Asian Flyways, which consist of 30 group of countries. It is one of the important flyway associated with India. So global basis, we are having 9 flyways. And in India, we are having 3. I have explained one. Now try to find out which are another 2. It is an homework for you. Identify. It's easy for me to give. It is easy for me to locate on the map. But by doing this, you can make your effort to see that. So smooth, what we say, spoon feeding will not help in the context. So I'm just giving you the clue, because after this class, when you study, then you will have a confidence of gaining the content. Idea is to give the information, knowledge, and along with that, methodology to study. Idea is to make sure that you have developed a method of studying such types of context. So 9 flyways are there. Out of that, 3 are associated with India. The first one is something which we refer them as Central Asian Flyway. So apart from that, we also have African Asian parts. So try to find out which are those two, and these are always in the news. And it is annual migration, it is an annual cycle migration of the birds. So these birds should be protected from the source to the destination, and also in their journey, either on the land or the water or on the air, right? So such conventions, we refer them as convention of conservation of migratory species. Now here also it divides the species into two appendix. The one is the species which are threatened with extinction, and second is species that need more international cooperation in protecting them. So if any species, if it is in the current affairs, I'm repeating, current affairs from 1 to 2 years, if you identify that species, whenever you are reading, they say this particular species is covered under CMS and it is classified under appendix 1. So that statement will be asked in your UPSC examination. All old data will not be asked. Recent data. See how they travel, how they have direction. Generally in your geography you have studied something called as Earth's geomagnetism. So they use the geomagnetism part. So Earth has a magnetic field, and if you are reading your geography regularly, Earth's magnetic field has many characteristics. It prevents the harmful solar radiations which can enter into the Earth. So hence magnetic field of an Earth, which is developed due to the fluid. See, generally, when you talk about Earth's magnetic field, it is developed because of the fluid nife, which is rotating along the Earth, and we refer that as geodynamo mechanism. So because of that dynamo mechanism, as the Earth rotates, and that geodynamo mechanism which carries the nife means the iron and nickel, fluid nife in the outer core, which rotates along with the Earth. So that develops something called as a dynamo mechanism, and that dynamo mechanism is the reason for Earth's magnetic field. I'm repeating, the dynamo mechanism of the rotation of the fluid nife in the outer core of an Earth develops the magnetic field on the Earth. So this is the Earth. So we have magnetic fields which are developed on the Earth because of this dynamo effect of the fluid nife, which is in the outer core. And that magnetic field is used by migratory species. It protects the Earth from harmful radiations. Plus, this magnetic field is used by migratory species. So this magnetic field is used by them. Is it clear? So this is how you should understand. It is not the only way. They use this to locate their places. So that's why when we say when the Earth's magnetic field flips, then it will have an impact on that, right? So it is one of the way where they can reach to their destination. Take an example of olive ridley turtles. They travel from Indian Ocean to Pacific Ocean, then again come back to their original location, right? Now this CMS, the countries which have signed to that, we refer that as Conference of Parties to CMS. Right? And they also meet once in 3 years. So COP 14th means they are meeting for the 14th time. COP 14th means they are meeting for the 14th time. And this 14th meeting was in 2023 to be scheduled, but now it has started. If you are reading your current affairs, so February, last 2 days. So it has started in the month of February, 12 to 17. Where? In Samarkand. Right. So remember these things. COP14. So outcomes of that, once this ends, then the summary will be there. So here in the first day, they have released a report. They have released a report, and this report is referred as State of World's Migratory Species. State of World's Migratory Species. So this is the first ever report. It is the first ever report of the migratory species. First ever report of migratory species. Migratory species. So please read this migratory report, maybe when you are having free Saturday or Sunday, or if it is not there, then at the last day I'll give the report points. So last day of my class when it will be there, so while defining that, I'll give important points of this, important points of that, right? Uzbekistan, Samarkand is in Uzbekistan. Map work, right? And the last time, that is COP13, COP13 was in the year 2020. Now, which was the host country in the year 2020? It was India. India was the host country of 2020, that is COP13. Now, outcomes of this are very important. Outcomes of this are very important. Now, when you are reading your current affairs, once this is completed, once this is done, then its outcomes becomes important for your exam point of view. Now, India hosted in the year 2022, and in the context of India created very huge impact on awareness about Great Indian Bustard. Great Indian Bustard. And there India had kept this Great Indian Bustard as its mascot reference. Mascot. So Gibby was the mascot of India's 2020. Is it clear? So please remember, first ever report, and it is the first ever report of migratory species. First ever migratory. Is it clear? So remember that COP 14th, it has started in Uzbekistan and the place called as Samarkand. And Samarkand is also important in your historical perspective. If you are reading history, so Samarkand is associated with something called as Mughal dynasties. Okay. Now next, these birds which are always in the news, Great Indian Bustard, which are always in the news, Great Indian Bustard. Great Indian Bustards, the moment when we say they are more significantly found in the state of Rajasthan, adjoining state of Gujarat, and in the Western Ghats also you can find them, and central portion. Western Ghats, central portion, and these areas. So these are the location of Great Indian Bustard. Great Indian Bustard. Right. And it is critically endangered bird. Critically endangered bird. Now, in the same way, we have lesser florican. Lesser florican. And this lesser florican is also found very predominantly in the states of Gujarat, entire Western Ghats, then central portions of India, including Madhya Pradesh and all. So this is where they are found. It is also critically endangered species. Then we have something called as Bengal florican. Bengal florican. So this is Bengal florican. Bengal florican. And this Bengal florican is found in the states of Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, and Assam. Very peculiar. It is found in Assam, more strongly in Assam, the grasslands of Assam. Grasslands of Assam. And as the name is Bengal floricon, it is not found in the West Bengal. It is not in the West Bengal. Assam plus Uttarakhand and UP. Uttarakhand, see this. Uttarakhand and UP. So we refer this as very important data because they all are in the news. Critically endangered species. And there has been a systematic effort to protect and conserve them. So this is how you have to remember the data. This is how you have to remember the data. See, you don't have to go in detail about why it is Bengal. So remember that it is named after some criteria. The moment when we say nomenclature, it is done on the basis of the person who has identified, and the species scientific names are different. Don't go with the in detail about nomenclature. Right. Then we have something called as Convention of Biological Diversity. Now this Convention of Biological Diversity, it is an outcome. It is an outcome of Earth Summits. Earth Summit. Or we say Earth Summit. Earth Summit. Or it is also called as Rio Summit. Rio Summit, which was held in the year 1992. Rio Summit in the year 1992. Right. Now, when I take global warming and climate change, I'll explain that in detail. So in the Earth Summit or Rio Summit, three conventions were signed. Three important conventions were there. The first convention is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Second one is United Nations Convention for Combating Desertification. United Nations Convention for Combating Desertification. Very important convention. Third one is Convention on Protection of Biological Diversity. Three important conventions were done. And when we talk about these conventions, the COPs, the Conference of Parties, will be different for that. If you see UNFCCC, they meet every year. Every year they meet. Yearly meeting is there. Convention on Biological Diversities, they meet once in 2 years. Meet once in 2 years. Now, United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, they also meet once in 2 years. So when I take global warming and climate change, I'll explain this in detail. But here, out of these three conventions which were signed in the 1992, the important for biological diversity protection is CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. Convention on Biological Diversity. It is very flexible and comprehensive binding agreement for the Convention of Biodiversities. The major idea is to conserve the biodiversities. Then sustainable use of components of biological diversity. Now remember, biological diversity means plants, animals, their usages. Plants, animals, food, medicines, all these are referred as the components of biodiversity, and their usages. Plants for some activities, medicinal plants for creating medicine. Some are used for economic activities, some are used for medicinal activities, some are used for commercial activities. So when you trade them, when you sell them, large amount of economic benefits are there. So hence, sustainable use of components of biodiversity. You should make sure that when you are using them, they are not to be disturbed. UNCC means United Nations Convention for Combating Desertification. Don't get much stress. I'll explain that in detail. So when I take Earth Summit, I'll be taking that. So when we discuss global warming and climate change, I'll be discussing that. So here, focus on CPD. This will become again revision when I take a global warming. So here it talks about the sustainable use of biological diversity, then fair and equitable sharing up of benefits arising out of that genetic resources. Fair benefit, like you have taken any plant, from that you have converted medicine, you have made medicine, and when you trade that, the benefit should be shared. So we refer that as utilization and benefits of these. So we refer that as convention of biological diversity, CBDs. Now we have made certain changes in that. Sometimes when the conventions are amended, sometimes when the conventions are amended. Now what do you mean by amendment? You are having an act, and that act cannot be completely replaced by something. So you bring the changes in that. You bring the changes in that, which is needed for that time. So original convention, you can't completely remove that and bring something new. So there is a process where the amendment or changes are introduced in the convention, and these amendments or changes which are introduced in the conventions, we refer them as protocols. We refer them as protocols, right? So one of the way in which the amendments have been introduced to the original conventions, amendment to the original conventions, so we refer them as protocols. So hence, to this biological diversity, two protocols are there. It means two amendments are there to that, and these two amendments are the Nagoya protocol and Cartagena protocol. It talks about two, Cartagena protocol and Nagoya protocol. So these are the two amendments to the Convention of Biological Diversity. Cartagena protocol, it is based on this Colombia country where it was signed. The Cartagena protocol talks about protecting the living modified organisms. LMO means living modified organisms. So living modified organisms are those organisms which have been modified by deliberate change in their genetic makeup. We refer that as biotechnology. Genetically, technically we refer them as transgenic plants and animals. Transgenic plants and animals. Genetically modified one. Genetically modified one. So we refer that as living. This is what we say, living material, living modified organisms. Living modified organism. Biotechnology, transgenic plants and transgenic animals. So when they are moved from one country to another country, when they are moving from country to country, it means when they are taken from one country to another, country A to country B, you need to protect them. So to make protection and conservation of these living modified organisms, we refer that as Cartagena protocol on biosafety. Safety of these transgenic plants and animals, right? And it was adopted on January 2000 and entered into force in the year 2003, and it is having a membership of 172. So we refer that as Cartagena protocol on biosafety. Then Nagoya protocol. Nagoya protocol, the moment when you say, remember that it is about the genetic resources and their benefits. Like we come across certain plants, certain algae, etc., which are used for developing medicines. And we also find certain types of the genetic resources which are used in the cosmetics, etc. So we refer them as genetic resources. So here it is entire living body, and here products of that, products of the resources, like medicinal part, cosmetics, food, etc., which are traded in the international market. To make sure that the profit should be fairly and equitably distributed from utilization of the resources of that. And we refer that as Nagoya Protocol, as it was signed in the Japan country. So it is access to genetic resources, fair and equitable sharing. And it was adopted on 29th October 2010 and entered into force in the 2014. Is it clear? So remember these things. Cartagena Protocol and Nagoya Protocol. Yes, it is game of words, play of words, what we say, play of words. Right. Then Convention COP15 CBD. Now, the moment when we talk about COP15 CBD, one thing you should remember. So, when the conference of parties meet, they always, some, not all, some conference of parties, they give award. Some conference of parties, they give award. They give award. And these awards are to those people, they identify the people who have made their contribution in the context of that convention. Now here also, the conference of parties of CBD, when it meets once in 2 years, it announces the awards called as Midori Awards. So Midori Awards are associated with COP-CBD, Convention on Biological Diversities. And this Midori Award is given to the people who have contributed to biodiversity, who have made their own contribution for protection and conservation of biodiversity. For them it is given. Now the last meeting which was done was COP15. Now because of COVID, this was held in two parts. The first part was held in Kunming, that is China. And the second part was held in Canada. Second part is in Canada. Right. Now, any idea where will be the COP 16th will be held? 16th conference. And this COP15 was in the year 2022. Now the COP16 will be this year itself, 2024 itself. COP16 in this year itself. Yes, it is in Colombia in the month of December. COP16 of CBD. It means 16th time they will be meeting in Colombia, and 15th time they have met, once in Kunming and once in Canada. So hence the outcome of the COP15 CBD is referred as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And here it talks about the global approach to protect and conserve the biodiversities. It consisted of the 4 goals to protect and conserve the biodiversities, right? That is to conserve and restore the biodiversity, ensure sustainable use of the biodiversities, share the benefits fairly and equitably, and enable the transformative changes. So these are the 4 goals. 4 goals of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, right? Apart from that, important outcomes are, it talked about 30 by 30 target. So it is to restore 30% of degraded land by 2030. This is one. restore 30% of degraded land by 2030. And also it talks about bring 30% of land or water, that is ocean or water, 30% of land or water, that is ocean under protected area by 2030. So effort should be done to bring 30% of land, 30% of water under protected areas by 2030. We have very less amount of land which is protected, say around 8%, 10%. So we have to increase that. And it also said that there is a risk from the pesticide. So we should reduce the risk from the pesticide by at least 50% by 2030. Tackle the climate change through nature-based solution. Nature-based solution is very, very important one. Nature-based solutions means where you are making an effort to conserve the biodiversity by making use of the resources which are not referred as engineering resources. Now, the best example of nature-based solution is Green Wall of Africa. Green Wall of Africa. Right. So when I take forest, I'll explain this. So it is the involvement of the plants, blowing the plants and trees instead of using steel rods, instead of using the bricks in construction of the conservation. So nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions, generally we say they are permanent. And these nature-based solutions, they help each other. For example, if you are planting the trees, to tackle the global warming or climate change issues, so it is where it is removing the atmospheric carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas. Plus, these trees will also help in biodiversity. When the trees are there, birds and animals will reach there. So it will help in increasing biodiversity. And these trees which are there, so they will help in something which we refer them as increasing the water conservation, that is reducing land degradation. Ramit, yes, living bridges are classical example of the nature-based solution. So if you reach to the northeastern part of India, you will have living bridges are there. Along with providing connectivity, they support the ecosystem. Perfect. Living bridges are examples of nature-based solution. So nature-based solution is something which is required. We don't need something artificial one. So try to put as much as nature-based solutions are there. That is rejuvenating the waterlands, rejuvenating the lakes, creating more amount of forest areas in that regions. So we refer them as nature-based solutions. Then secure, safe, legal and sustainable use of trade in the wild species by 2030. Identify the subsidies that are threat to the biodiversities and eliminate, reform or phase out them. Threats to the biodiversity. Sometimes when we provide support to them in financial assistance and all, so they are cultivated more, they are exploited more. So if you remove the subsidies to that, then they will be reduced in their consumption as well. Kunming Biodiversity Fund was created, and this Kunming Biodiversity Fund was created by China, where it has denoted around $233 million. $233 million. China has pledged this $333 million for conservation of biodiversity in developing countries. Conservation of biodiversity in developing countries. Right. And next is it gave an approval for a new fund. new fund, that is Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. So we don't have complete idea about what is this Global Framework Fund, and this will finance implementation of the Kunming Montreal Protocol. So only this is known to us, this Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. It will provide financial assistance to implement this global fund. It will provide financial assistance to implement the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, right? So protected area means national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves. We refer them as protected areas. Right? Now, HE targets. HE targets were from 2011 to 2020. Now, just remember that it's not in detail. So this HE targets will be replaced by the Kunming Declaration. So they will be replaced by Kunming Declaration, which have their own goals. So HE targets consist of 5 goals. That is, address the cause of biodiversity. Every statement will be the same. Reduce the direct pressure on biodiversity and promote sustainable use. Safeguard ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity. Biodiversity benefit to all. Participate planning and capacity building. And remember that this 5 goals, they consist of 20 targets. None of the targets were met. None of the targets were completely met. None of the targets met their goal. Only few which were partially reached. Remember, HE is again in Japan. Places in the news in Japan. Only 6 goals of that they reached partially. Only 6 which reached partially. That is target 9, identifying and prioritizing the alien invasion, access to the genetic resources, national biodiversity strategy and action plans for all, then conservation of terrestrial inland water and all. So that's why we have increased their conservation, and it has been updated to 30%. Now we say 30% we should conserve. Where? In the COP 15. Right. So these are partially achieved. Is it clear? Okay. Now, this is the outcome of that. There has been a significant expansion of protected areas. Right? So where at least 10% and 15% are there. 10% in the terrestrial, right? And over 2020 period, from 10% to at least 15% in the terrestrial, and from 3% to 7% in marine. So terrestrial, it has increased from 10 to 15%. Land areas, and in the marine area, it has increased from 3% to 7%. Now, what is the COP Kunming says? We have to make sure that these which have reached to 15%, which have reached to 7%, has to reach 30% by 2030. HE protocol may not be important for, but remember, HE protocol is associated with biodiversity, right? So just remember, there is no harm in remembering the 5 points. Remember, none of the goals have been reached, none of the targets have been reached. Partially we have reached, because it gave an insight of alien species. So you can't neglect that completely, but remember that it is associated with the biodiversity. Right. Now, the questions which were asked in the previous examination: which of the following national parks lies completely in the temperate alpine? So temperate means above the Tropic of Cancer. Alpine means at height. So if you see this, it should be above the Tropic of Cancer. That means north of Tropic of Cancer. And alpine means at the height. Right, at the height. So here, if you see Namdapa National Park, Neora Valley Park, Valley of National Parks. So this is suitable because that was in the news. That was in the news because of the current affair issues which were seen. Manas National Park. Namdapha National Park is in northeastern side. It is in the northeastern side. Now your homework is identify why this Namdapha National Park is important. Now I'll give a clue that it is the only national park in the world, only national park in the world where the big cats are seen at one stretch. It is the only national park in the world, only national park in the world where we find all the big cats, all the four big cats are seen there, right? Flying squirrel is also there, flying squirrel is also there, but all the big four cats are found in that region. Then which of the following area is Agastamalai Biosphere Reserve? Now, sometimes if that biosphere reserve is in the news, then they will ask about core area. Core area. Now, if you see the core areas of that, it can be Nayar, Papara, Shivmundrai. So, maps are very, very important. Factual data are very, very important. So, that's why in ecology and environment, data plays an important role. The facts plays an important role. So, here again, uh, Austin, you are correct. It is near Pepara, Shendurai, etc. So this is where we find them, and they all were in the current affairs at that time because Augusta Malai was received the status of World Network of Biosphere Reserve. So this area, Augusta Malai Biosphere Reserve, where we find these, we find them in the areas. So such facts are important. I'm telling you that how you should make notes for such parts. Then, in which of the following states is Pakoi Wildlife Sanctuary located? Right. So, Pakoi Wildlife Sanctuary. Again, it was in the news, so hence it was asked. It was in the news for last 1 to 2 years there. 1 to 2 years there. Yes, it was in the news. It was in the news. At least from 1 to 2 years, it was in the news. Last 2020, 2021, it was there in the news. Right. Most of the world's coral reefs are in the tropical waters. While defining yesterday, I told that yes, they are in the tropical waters. More than one third of the world's coral reefs are located in the territories of Australia, Indonesia. I told you this also. 30% are there. Then coral reefs host more number of animal phyla than those hosted by tropical rainforest. Is the statement correct? Is this correct? Coral reefs host more number of animal phyla than the hosted by tropical rainforest. Now here understand this, Surya and Purva. You have made a mistake that it is talking very specifically about animal phyla. So UPSC is play of words. It is play of words. Play of words. If you remove animal, then the statement is wrong. If you remove animal, then the statement is wrong. While defining, I told that coral reefs host more number of animal phyla. Plants will not be there, but insects, fish, so they will be there. So these corals, if which is referred as the rainforest of tropical sea, has more animal phyla than the plant species. So hence, coral reefs have more amount of animal phyla than the plants. So even the statement is correct here. So all the three statements are correct. So please read them carefully. It is play of words. Is it clear? If you remove animal, then the third statement is wrong. Coral reefs host more number of the biodiversity than tropical rainforest. It is wrong. It is only the animal phyla which is rich in corals. Then biodiversity is normally greater in the lower latitude as compared to that of higher latitudes. So it talks about the lower latitude. Lower latitude means equator, Tropic of Cancer, etc. As compared to higher latitude. Higher latitude means poles and all. Animal phyla means animal kingdoms, insects, etc. Right. Then along the mountains gradients, biodiversity is normally greater in the lower latitude as compared to the higher latitudes. So it is maximum here, it decreases here. So while defining the biodiversity, I told that. So both are correct. Perfect. Both are correct. Both are correct. It is maximum in that region, right? Then which of the following phenomena might have influenced the evolution of organisms? Evolution of organism. So here we always talk about geography based continental drift theory. I have explained that how the continental drift theory is responsible for that. Then along with that we also have the glacial cycles. So ice ages, what we see. So ice ages, we have experienced these 5 ice ages are there. 5 ice ages the earth has experienced. So the ice age, and in between that we refer that as interglacial. So ice age and interglacial. Interglacial. Then again this is interglacial. Interglacial. So we have experienced ice age and interglacial. So hence it is both the statements which are correct. Perfect. Both the statements are correct here, right? So I have explained continental drift. Along with that, glacial cycles also dominate. That is your geography part, right? Then if a wetland of international importance is brought under Montrac's record, what does it mean? Montrac's record. We have from India, two from India, right? So Montrac's record means, where you should remember, changes in the ecological characteristics have occurred or occurring or likely to occur in the wetland as a result of human interference. Very straightforward. Very straightforward, right? The survival of wetland depends on cultures. It's not there. So you have to remember this part. Ecological characteristics. Perfect. Perfect. Right. Now, the red data book published by IUCN. Red data book published by IUCN contains. Now, don't confuse this with IUCN. IUCN is an institution and it publishes the book. It publishes the book called as the Red Data Book. Now, try to find endemic plants and animal species present in biodiversity hotspots, threatened plants and animal species, and protected sites for conservation of nature and natural resources in various countries. Which of the statements is correct? Which of the statement is correct? Perfect. So it takes care of not only the biodiversity hotspots, it is global, including hotspots. All the species are there. And here it is about threatened plants and animal species. Only two. Because protected sites are taken by IUCN, not by Red List. Don't get confused. So protected sites of conservation and nature, it is done by IUCN. And here the question is not about IUCN. The question is about the Red Data Book. So many students make a confusion. It is not about IUCN. It is asking about the Red Data Book which is published. So hence, again, I say it is play of words. Play of words. Is it clear? So threatened plants and animal species. This is perfect. Perfect. Right. With reference to Indian Desert National Park, again, which was in the news at that time, where we had the COP 13 2020, and immediately after that, in the next year, the question was asked. Next year it was asked. So when we talk about that, sometimes they may ask, it was spread in two districts. Yes, Jaisalmer and Barmer. Right. There is no human habitation inside the park. As I told, that there is possibility that you may find a certain amount of habitation there. It is not completely seen. So there is some amount of human habitation, those who are staying there since from long. Right. It is one of the natural habitats of great Indian bustard, Gibi, which was mascot of that. So all the three statements are correct here. So sorry, there is no human habitation. This is wrong, because we find human habitations are there. We find human habitations are there. So hence, apologies. 1 and 3 statements are correct. 1 is correct. 3rd is correct. Right. So this is the correct answer for that. C is the correct answer for that. Perfect. Right. Among the following tiger reserves, which one has the largest area under critical tiger habitat? Largest. Now this was with reference to tiger census. In the tiger census, they found that among the tiger reserves, the number of tigers decreased in few tiger reserves. Among them, one was there, which was Nagarjuna Srisailam, which is the largest tiger habitat of India, where the number of tigers decreased. Where the number of tiger decreased, right? And hence it was in the news. Nagarjuna Srisailam, largest Nagarjuna Srisailam. Perfect, right? With reference to Indian elephants, consider the following statements. Again, current affairs was asked. The leader of the elephant is always a female. This is very difficult. I say difficult questions will be there. We say it is very difficult question, not an easy one, very difficult question. The leader of an elephant is a female. This is correct. Then among the states in India, the highest population is Kerala. Now here you can make a catch. It is not Kerala. The highest population of the elephants you will find in which state? It is in Karnataka. Karnataka. Perfect. Karnataka. So the fourth statement is wrong here. So where you find the fourth statement, you can remove. We refer that as elimination. But the leader of elephant group is also female. So 1 and 2 statements are correct. Nowadays, they are removed this elimination. Elimination has been removed. Now, sometimes it becomes difficult. Sometimes it is difficult because they may add this elimination or they may not add. So they may give 1 statement is correct, 2 statements are correct, or 3 statements are correct with reference to that. So they may ask questions based on these perspectives, right? Which of the following protected areas are located in the Kaveri Basin? Again, it was in the current affairs, Kaveri Basin. So the moment when you talk about Kaveri Basin, you should remember the areas which are located. Now, I'll leave this to you. Read in the map and answer them. Read in the map and answer them. It's not about Nagarhole. It's about Papikonda National Park, which is in Andhra Pradesh, Satyamangala Tiger Reserve. So when we talk about that, Papikonda is in Andhra Pradesh. So Andhra Pradesh is not linked with Kaveri Basin. Is not with Kaveri Basin. Nagarhole you will find. Satyamangala you will find. Then Wayanad you can find, which is in Kerala. Is it clear? So it is 1, 3, and 4. 1, 3, and 4. This is in Kerala. And this is in Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh. Right. Now, these are the questions. You practice them when you are free. Please practice them. Please practice them. Right. Okay. Now, we'll move on to at least introduction of India's biodiversity. Now, the moment when you talk about India's biodiversity, remember that India is 7th largest country in area. And second thing is, India shares 2 biogeographical realms. It shares 2 biogeographical realms. Now, I have told them in the initial class, that is continental drift theory and how the biogeographical realms were there. Now, identify those biogeographical realms. It's a homework. Identify the 2 biogeographical realms. Third one is, due to presence of Himalayas, India experiences tropical climatic conditions. India experiences tropical climate. Right? Tropical climate. Then in the context of India, it is geologically very complex. A part is oldest. This is the oldest part. And this is recent, when Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate. So geologically, it is very complex. Then its landscapes are also not uniform. Some areas we find deserts, some areas we find rainforests are there. So its landscapes are not uniform. We have deserts, we have forests, we have grasslands, etc. And apart from that, India receives a rainfall which is periodic, monsoon type of rainfall. And India is also a country which is having long coastline, long coastline, right? So we have all these various perspectives are there, and that is why India is very rich in biodiversity. India is very rich in biodiversity, where we say India has India has four biodiversity hotspots. Hotspots. India has two hope spots. Hope spots. India has 18 biosphere reserves. Right. So we have 100 plus national parks. 100 plus national parks. 54 tiger reserves. Right. So we have all such types of the areas, and because of its geographical location, because of its geographical location and climatic factors, because of its geographical location and climatic factors, large amount of endemic species are there in India. Endemic means endemic means natural to that area, and hence India is not only rich in biodiversity, it is mega biodiverse country. India is one of the mega biodiverse country of the world. Mega biodiverse country of the world. So we have 17 mega biodiverse countries in the world. Out of that, India is one. Yes, we find elephants are there, tigers are there, tiger reserves are there. So all these are. So it means that India has very rich amount of biodiversity because of these characteristics. Because of these characteristics. And if you see the Indian perspectives, according to the data, 12% of mammals are endemic to India. 4.5% of the birds are endemic to India. Endemic means native to India. 33% of plants are endemic to India. 56% of amphibians are endemic to India. And reptiles are also endemic to India. So these are the endemism of India. Endemism of India, right? So whenever when you are reading any answers, or when you are reading any content in the context of biodiversity, you should remember this as a proper introduction in the context of India. Proper introduction in the context of India. Now, there are many factual data which are associated with the Indian part, like biosphere reserves. So in India, we are having 18 biosphere reserves, and on map you can show them. In Himachal Pradesh, cold desert is there. Run of Kutch in Gujarat. Nilgiris biosphere, which is at the confluence of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Agastyamalai agastyamalai then Achankar Amarkantak, Simlifal in Orissa, Sundarban in West Bengal, Nokrek in Meghalaya, Kanchenjunga in Sikkim, Dibang in Sikkim, Dibru Saikova again in Assam, right? Pachmari, Amarkantak, and all. So we have 18 biosphere reserves in India. So remember the places. Remember the places. And if any biosphere reserve is in the news, then you have to name them and you have to make a reference of that. Yes, Sundarban is there in West Bengal. Nanda Devi in Uttarakhand. So please read them carefully. Read them carefully. Read them carefully. Is it clear? Great Nicobar, etc. Out of these 18 biosphere reserves, There are 12 biosphere reserves. There are 12 biosphere reserves which are included into the world network of biosphere reserves. World network of biosphere reserves. And these are Nilgiris, Gulf of Mannar, Sundarban, Nanda Devi, Nokrek, Pachmari, Simlifal, Achankar Amarkantak, Great Nicobar, Agastamalai, Kanchenjunga, and 12th is Panna, Madhya Pradesh. Recently, recently in the year 2021, Panna, Madhya Pradesh got the status of World Network of Biosphere Reserve. Panna Biosphere Reserve. It got the status of that, right? So these are the 12 biosphere reserves where, along with protection, conservation, they also make sustainable development as per sustainable development goals here, right? So the purpose of World Network of Biosphere Reserve is that they are having cultural significance, which promote sustainable development along with protection. They promote sustainable development of that area with the sustainable development goals there, and that is why they need to be protected and preserved in the context of that. So hence, world network of these are significant. So I think we can conclude a session here. We can conclude a session. So tomorrow we'll continue from where we have left. Is it clear? Yes, endemic means which are in that areas. Endemic means which are confined to that geographical regions. Endemic means in India we are having endemic species. If the species is in China but not in India, then we say it is endemic to China. If the species is found in America, not in India, then we say it is endemic to China. Now, if you take an example of, say, for example, if you take the potatoes were endemic to Peru and Bolivia. Potatoes are endemic to Peru and Bolivia, but we use them in India. So potatoes are endemic to Peru and Bolivia, and they were introduced to India. Coffee is endemic to Africa, and from Africa it has been introduced to India. So coffee, potato, they are not endemic to India. They are endemic to their original countries like Peru, Africa, etc. Chili is also not endemic to India. It has been found in some other, from there it has been introduced. Okay, so we can conclude the session. So I'm trying my best to explain as much as possible. You make a proper revision and link them with your current affairs. I don't think it is difficult to remember, but revision is a must. Proper revision is important, and UPSC always talks about play of words. That's what I told you in 3 or 4 questions, how the words are tackled in the statements. So till then, we'll meet up tomorrow. So till then, take care and bye.